artist based here on Oahu, and I'm usually giving talks to elementary kids, so maybe the questions will be a little different today. But yeah, my voice is a little bit gone. I was coaching my 5-year-old son's Little League team, and it's amazing how much you have to yell at them to get them to do stuff. Uh, it's almost like talking to your employees and trying to get them to listen to you as well. But yeah, thanks to Noah and the crew here. This is epic. Really stoked that there's an opportunity for creatives to get together. We have a podcast called Secondary Colors, and it's something that we really enjoy doing because we have various guests on the show and we get to talk about like all of our similar challenges and ways to overcome them. And you find that in community, a lot of people have those same challenges, especially in Hawaii. So really just a way to build up the community and raise up a new era of entrepreneurs and artists. So trying to get rid of that like starving artist mantra, you know, it's like if you have talent and skill, you should be able to make a living doing it. So yeah, the topic is sanctuary, which I really appreciate them giving me a topic because it's kind of like when you have a design client and they're just like, do whatever, I don't want to stifle your creativity, just do whatever you want. And you're like, well, where do I go with that? I have no idea what you want. So always getting just some sort of feedback of what a client wants is amazing. So sanctuary, something that I feel like I have a lot of thoughts about, can be described as peace, tranquility, retreat, or safety. I think there's a spiritual aspect to sanctuary for sure. I mean, a lot of religious organizations, like the place you actually meet is called the sanctuary. So, but I kind of want to talk more about it being a retreat and a place of peace and a place that you can kind of find solace. So, I moved to Hawaii in 2005. I waited tables and bartended for years just to pay the bills. I mean, my wife and I loved Hawaii so much that just bartending late at night, bussing tables, whatever, it was just worth it just to pay the bills. And I don't know if you've worked in that industry before, but after a certain period of time, you're just like, dude, I cannot just serve drunk people at midnight anymore. Like, especially if you're a creative wired, like, that's your outlet, right? So I was trying to balance this thought of I am an industrial designer by trade, went to college for it. I felt like I was pretty decent at it, loved creating, and trying to navigate that of like, hey, where am I going to go from there? So I started in about 2010 getting back into art. I started illustrating some prints. If you've ever heard me talk before, tell my story, my wife came to me and wanted some illustrated prints of some of our favorite spots in Hawaii, places we surfed at or hiked at or whatever. And so I started doing that for our house, and at the same time I had a friend that had an Etsy shop, and so I just was like on a whim, I'm like, let's just start an Etsy store and see where it goes from there. So I had a few prints that we printed for our house, took some pictures, acted like I knew what I was doing. It's like the fake it till you make it mindset of like, yes, I have an Etsy shop, I'm legit, you know. And then we started getting a couple orders, and I'm like, oh crap, like where am I going to print this? Like how am I going to ship it? Like all of these things that maybe you don't learn in design school, right? Of like actually running some sort of business, making clients happy. I mean, we definitely worked with a lot of clients from a design standpoint, with branding, packaging, product design, making models. We did collaborations with like 3M and larger brands through college. So I kind of learned like how the design process worked from there, but not maybe as much the business aspect of it of like, what is wholesale pricing? How do you fulfill an order to this guy, or like shipping internationally or things like that? So there's been a lot of learning curve with that. But so that was 2010, you know, 12, 13 years ago. And balancing working at a restaurant, my sanctuary came from going home at night and being able to create. I'd go, you know, do what I needed to do to just make the tips and whatever, and then could come home, jump on Illustrator or Sketchbook, and work till 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning. And that was kind of like my sanctuary. Like that was a place where I was like, oh, I'm like creatively fulfilled here. Like I'm actually getting, I mean, if you're creative, you kind of feel that, right? Like I'm being fulfilled by what I'm doing. Like I feel like I have a purpose and I'm making something. And then you start growing your business, and it kind of turns into this balance of doing your business tasks that you have to do, emails and all that kind of stuff, and balance it with like I want to create and I want to make stuff, and I have this whole list of things that I want to create, but I'm also like have to go to all these meetings or things like that. So I feel like for a long time for me the sanctuary aspect went away, and I was like, oh, this is just like kind of a burden, you know, like you start getting busy and maybe you kind of forget what your why is with that. You know, I started to have this creative outlet to celebrate these favorite spots that we go visit all the time, and then it's a good thing that you have people reaching out for like doing work with you and like, hey, you know, we have this hotel that we want you to do our packaging of something or a branding or graphics or things like that. And I'm very blessed by that. I'm very blessed that I've had opportunities over the past dozen years or so. But also, like as a creative, sometimes it takes a fire away from me, or a little bit burnt out, I guess. This is a slide when I did the Mana Up program back in 2018. My mom loves these. She saved them from when I was a 2 and 3 year old, so she's very proud of them. I don't know what happened to the paper on a couple of those. It looks like it's from like ancient Egypt or something. But I mean, I've been into art my entire life. Like those are from when I was 2 and 3 years old, just drawing cars and whatever. And I kind of knew that from the beginning, like when I was really young, that I just loved creating. I love making things, like whether it was just even just like building furniture or making stuff out of cardboard or stuff like that. I think maybe a lot of you folks can relate to that, of like, you know that you're wired that way. And I was talking with Spencer back there, and we were talking about just having our kids, pushing our kids in a certain direction, like seeing what their giftings are, but also kind of balancing that with like, no, like you can learn new things and you can be whatever you want, you know. So I think that there's value in that. But I like to look back at these when I do get burnt out or bogged down and like lose my sanctuary of like, no, I really love doing this. You know, I've been doing this for 40 years and I love it, and that's how I'm made. So I think just coming back for me, just like grounding yourself with that, and like gratefulness is a huge thing of like, I am grateful that I live in a beautiful place. I have an amazing family. I am able to create art for a living. Like there's so many people that would like kill for that, right? So I think if you wake up in the morning and you just go through that, like, what are these things I'm grateful for? It kind of sets your mindset for the day, I think. Like, and I'm kind of preaching to myself on that one. I feel like I need to do that myself, but I think there's a lot of value in that for sure. So got out of the restaurant, was able to do create art full time, maybe like mid 2011. So now I've been at it full time for, you know, about a dozen years. And we on our podcast, I was telling you, like, I really like encouraging others. Like that's something I feel like is kind of my platform. But also, like, entrepreneurship is a grind. Like, I feel like I sugarcoat it sometimes. I have to balance that with like, no, it's super hard. Like there's a lot of hours, there's a lot of things, a lot of challenges to overcome. But I think it's totally worth it, right? Like I think I love the road I've went down, and I am so blessed by every opportunity I've had. Like the people I've been able to meet through this that I would never have been able to meet otherwise. Like great friends I've made, and just like rich relationships, getting involved deeper in the community, opportunities to give back. Like all those things are great, just byproducts of being able to put your work out there and do business in Hawaii. So yeah, I guess it's really hard, but it's worth it, I guess is the thing I'd like to say. But yeah, I encourage anybody that feels like they have a creative gift to put it out there, you know? Like, I think one of the things we talked about was sanctuary is defined by safety, and that's kind of the opposite of like putting your work out there, right? Like, safety of me creating in my studio for myself, okay, that's pretty safe, right? And I think we had Mel and James on the podcast last month, and thanks for coming, Melon. I appreciate seeing some friendly faces out here. But he talked about that of like creating for yourself versus like having these list of clients that you're trying to complete jobs for, and having that safety sometimes can be really fulfilling and enjoyable, because the minute you put your stuff out there, I don't know, maybe I'm just alone in this, but you put your work out there and it's a part of your soul, right? Like, it's a part of who you are. So you're like, oh, if there's negative feedback, like they're like attacking me personally, right? So I think that there is, and maybe that's what we're talking about, of like turning art into like just creating art versus creating it as an entrepreneur, as a business. So those are kind of two separate things, I think. And I have to be sensitive to that of, yeah, maybe I do need to create just some stuff for myself and just be validated by that and enjoy that and remember why I started doing that. So yeah, that's just some thoughts I thought tied in really well there. And that's what I'm working on too, is like setting boundaries, right? Like, does anybody have like that 80-hour work week and it's just like, okay, I'm checking emails like when I'm playing with my kids, or like I'm up late and go through all this stuff. Oh, I gotta send these revisions over at midnight, and then I go like straight to bed, and like you're thinking about it all night of like working on the files and whatever. So that's something my wife says I need to do better, so just to share that with you guys. But yeah, just setting boundaries of like work is work. And I don't know if anybody has like a work phone and a personal phone. I kind of thinking like I should do that, because I get like so many just random messages and stuff that I feel like those are sort of things that kind of like take that sanctuary away, right? Because there should be a little separation. Like, when we moved our art studio out of our house, like that was kind of a plus for me, because I was able to go home and be like, okay, I'm at home, you know? But now that like we're so connected, we have it on our everything on our phone, on our laptop, whatever, like it's, if you're not purposeful about that, like that can all get just blended together. And I think that there has to be a separation there of some sort. I mean, maybe some folks can work like that, but I have 3 young kids too, so it's like I feel, at least in this season, like I'm being just bombarded by so many things. So I usually function really well when I have like, I'm kind of like an introvert, but I can act like I'm not if I have to. But I really like having that alone time and just like recharge time, whether it's like going to hike on your own or things like that. Like, I love my friends, but I'm like, hey, I really just don't want to hang out with you. And then you kind of come back and you're recharged from that. So that's a sanctuary right there, right? But I've found, having like several young kids plus a business and things like that, I'm like, oh shoot, like that is kind of gone for the time being. So you have to adjust and try to make that work. I think that's one thing I've really noticed, just as like an action step for anybody, is like doing this for 12 years, I realized like how much things are constantly changing. Like, we would get an account to sell my prints like, you know, a dozen years ago, and in my head I'm like, okay, well that's going to be on our friend an account for the rest of eternity. But they go out of business in 2 years or something like that. Or like, you have an employee that you really like, but they move to the mainland, or they get another job. And you see that with kids too, is like every couple years it's like they're in a new phase of life. There's like a new chapter and a new season. So I think that that's something, if you anticipate that, it can really help you to not be surprised by it, or let it just change what your purpose, your mission is. So that's another thing that maybe I've just learned over the years. Maybe that would be able to help somebody there. And then burnout. Does anybody deal with burnout ever? Nobody? Okay, just me. I found in the pandemic, the silver lining for me was I didn't get any emails or phone calls. Like I just sat in the studio and I was like, I can do whatever I want. This is so amazing. And there was, I mean, obviously not to downplay any of the challenges and the, how horrible the whole pandemic is and everything that negatively came out of that. But there were so many things I was able to do that I had wanted to do for years, and it just didn't happen. So we started screen printing in our studio. I was able to create a lot of new work for myself and just for like a lot of the location work that I really enjoy doing. And it almost made me realize that for so long, I kind of took in like every job that came in. I was just like, well, I'm a small business owner. If I don't take this job, I'm going to be out of business tomorrow. And what if the work dries up? So I got in a habit of just like, okay, yeah, I just have to take it on, like whatever, like just try to make it work and put it on the schedule. And I definitely got burnt out by that. And it took the pandemic in 2020 for me to realize, like, all of a sudden, I had somebody describe it that it's like, like the old school TVs that have the white noise where you turn the channel and you're on the UHF or VHF. And it was like all the white noise was just turned down all of a sudden. And it gave me like such clarity creatively that, I mean, I guess that's why people take sabbaticals, right? They go on like a 6-month, just go do something for themselves or clear their head or change their mindset, because you can go down a road for so long and before you know it, you've lost that sanctuary, you've lost that peace and tranquility that you enjoyed for so long. And I think it's fair to say, like, to not give that up, for the sake of a job or for the sake of pleasing another client or things like that. So I've tried to get better at saying no. I try not to say all this like in front of actual clients, because they're like, oh, you're just going to say no to everything. But in front of like people in the industry, I feel like you guys can kind of relate maybe that that it's okay to say no to projects. Like if it's something that isn't a fit for you, I mean, if you feel like that is the one thing that's going to put you under, if you don't take on that job, then maybe there's something you need to address with your business. But there's definitely a season to pay your dues, and we talk about that on the podcast a lot. Like at the beginning, you're taking on a lot of work, and I feel like I honed my craft a lot by taking on other work that was maybe outside my comfort zone, and I got to learn and got to meet deadlines and take constructive feedback and all those sort of things. But then at some point you can pick and choose those things. Like you can go to a point where you're like, okay, I've been doing this for a little while and I really want to pick the companies I work with. I really want to pick the nonprofits we partner with. Like that's something that's really important for us, is like we have a network of charity partners that we like to give back to, or like take on design work. Like I've worked with Surfrider Foundation, or Carissa Moore's More Aloha. I'm doing a package for her right now. And a lot of them come to me like, we'll pay you. I'm like, no, I like to take on like 1 or 2 of those a year just to be like, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing, right? Like I want to be able to give back to the community. I want to be able to make a difference, as opposed to just like, no, just got to churn out more work. Just got to make a hotel happy for a design package, So that's something for me personally that I feel fulfilled by. And I think like generosity and serving, it's like that really kind of like paradox thing where you feel like you're giving and you're going to be left with less, but you end up with more. Like it's like the weirdest thing of you work on a project, or you just, I mean, even financially or whatever, you give to somebody and you yourself are the one that's blessed by it. It's like the strangest thing. But yeah, I encourage you guys, like if you do feel burnout, to find that opportunity. Maybe even, I mean, it doesn't have to be something huge, right? But even like whether it's serving somewhere or whether it's just like using your skills and your giftings, right? Because I really enjoy that. Like that's just something that's been a really good outlet for me. I kind of forgot what slides I have on here, but we'll just go through and kind of talk about them. This is my research and development slide here. So I have to look back at this all the time and be like, man, we are so blessed that we can like ride a bike or drive to these places in like 30 minutes, And the beauty of our islands here, you can get bogged down with work or trying to deal with challenges or difficult things, and you get outside and go explore, I get burnt out in my studio, and I'm like, no, I gotta just churn it out. I'm just gonna sit here like all night and figure it out. And I'm like, the next day I go out surfing for 30 minutes, and I get the idea of like how to fix this project and how to finish it. And it's such a counterintuitive thing that I just encourage maybe somebody that's struggling with that to just get outside, change your perspective or your mindset. And I mean, those are my sanctuaries right there, right? Like, even down to my kids, like, they are nightmares a lot of times, but they're also a sanctuary. Like, if you have kids, you can relate. Like, they're insane. And I go, like, on a trip, like we were talking about exhibiting, like, on the West Coast or Japan or something, and I'm like, okay, this is great. Like, I have a week where I can just, like, go stay in a hotel, just, like, go do some artwork, do an exhibition, and, like, have the evenings off, whatever. And then, like, one day into it, you're like, gosh, I miss my family so much. It's crazy. And then as soon as you get back, you realize that they're still crazy. But yeah, I really, that's something I've learned over time is, like, as hard as it is when you have a whole to-do list, is just to find a place that you can be refreshed. Because if you just keep, like, it's just like going through that wall, right? Like, you're just like, how can I not figure this design project out or art project or challenge with a difficult client or something? Like, it's just wild how that works sometimes. So again, I'm just preaching to myself. This is all stuff I need to work on. Oh yeah, here we go here. So my brother-in-law printed a shirt with my face on it for my birthday. And when my twins act up, I make them wear it together. And one likes it, one doesn't. You could tell. And then this is my fault, but I bought my 2-year-old a drum set. And he's actually, like, really good. But again, like, that's not sanctuary, right? Like, it's super loud. My neighbors are like, oh, Nick, I heard you got a drum set. You're like, yeah. So we try to close the door and windows when they're playing, but they got light up drumsticks too, which are, like, super sick. So, and then actual sanctuary. I don't know if anybody is into ice bath therapy, but that's something I got into like a year ago, and I would be just like, so we have at the time we had like 4-year-old twins plus newborn, and I don't know, just like managing a business and everything. Like, I feel like I can share with you guys just because we're all like, we're creating and we're trying to run businesses, but like I was really struggling with it, like trying to be like, man, I just don't have enough hours in the day, stuff's falling through the cracks. And I had a buddy that was doing like Wim Hof breathing and things like that. He's like, hey, come over and check it out. So had the ice down to like 38 degrees, and it's amazing. Like, if you guys have done any research on it, it's amazing like how it can just calm you, and it's like almost like a dopamine release that you're it's like physical benefits and mental benefits. So I'd go on the ice for 3 to 10 minutes based on the temperature, and afterwards, like, sure, I think there's physical benefits, but then there's also this mental benefit of like, hey, I just did something difficult, like I just did a hard thing, and I think that's even good for like the morning, when you feel like you have this whole thing of projects to go through or things to work on. You can spend 5 minutes and it sucks because it's not comfortable. You just have to go in there and you know that. But if you can teach yourself that, like, yeah, this sucks, but I have to do it. And then, like, it almost trains your mind that, like, okay, like, I can do this. I got in the ice this morning. It's easy. I can tackle this. So that's something that's just worked for me. I mean, not something that would work for everybody. I can't get my wife to go in there, but yeah, just something that's been really, really helpful for me personally. Yeah, so sanctuary, I think that's just like a lot of my thoughts maybe. The other thing, I guess, to wrap it up is sanctuary in community. And I think that is a huge part of this, of having either a pauhana or this morning breakfast where people get together and they share with each other, and you don't feel like you're alone, right? Like, sometimes I think, like, when I started what I was doing, I felt kind of alone. I mean, I knew a lot of people at the restaurant, but none of them were creatives. And they couldn't relate, right? Like if you can talk to somebody about challenges you're having, I mean, you don't want to be that friend that's like constantly venting about your work. Like I feel like I've been that friend in the past, and but if you guys can find this common ground of like the things you're both dealing with, and then in this community or networking with people, like in Hawaii, it's huge, especially of just like networking with other folks. And if you do business well and you're a kind person and you meet deadlines, like that goes a long way. And I was in the Mana Up Business Accelerator program in 2018, and that was really an eye-opening experience for me because I felt I walk in, I'm like, these are my people. I'm here, like, and I knew nothing. Like I compared to the people that spoke and some of the other business owners, like you have to go into things as like I'm here to learn, you know, like I'm not here as like the expert or anything, and I don't want to come across that here either. Like I'm just sharing what I've done over the past dozen years. Maybe it'll help somebody, maybe it doesn't apply to your business or art specifically, um but yeah, the community aspect has been something that has really blessed me. And you start finding that you aren't alone, and a lot of people have the same issues. And even like an example of like shipping something to Hawaii, like, oh, we're gonna like get a crate or a container and like split it with another business or something. And there's a lot of opportunities. You know, we have to be resourceful here just because we are isolated, and costs, especially now, are super high. So I think the people that form together in community are the ones that are going to find success, and they're the ones that are going to be blessed by it. I'm at a point, I think, in my career where I want to encourage other people and raise them up for success. It's like the mantra of the rising tide raises all the boats. It's like when you first start out, you're kind of like, no, I want to sink all the boats. Like, but you see that even like with some commercial artists that came before me, like they paved a way for galleries to be into like, oh yeah, we'll carry a line of prints. Like it doesn't have to be like $10,000 originals. Like people can come in as either a traveler or a local and don't have a huge art budget, but they're like, oh, I could spend, you know, $50, $100 and have something cool, a keepsake in my house. So I recognize that there are a lot of other folks that came before me 5-10 years before that kind of set that path, and I feel like even now, like maybe I'm doing a bit of that for the future art or creative community. So again, something that I just really am passionate about, and I am not the expert on anything, but I always am learning, and I think that's a really important takeaway as well, is to never act or assume you know everything, because the minute you do is the minute that you're unable to learn anything new. I think anybody can kind of picture in their head that person of like, oh, okay, like that person knows it all. Like there's no way they're gonna ever learn anything new. But I have spent the last dozen years failing. Like that's just what it is when you're a business owner. Like if you are fairly new to creating or an entrepreneur, like failure is part of it. If you're not able to punch through the walls and the failure, then you're just not going to make it. But it's also, you have to know it's okay to fail as long as you're learning from it. If you, yeah, I mean, we've had so many failures, but you know, you look on Instagram and it's perfect Instagram life, right? And like, oh, Nick never does anything wrong. He's the happiest guy ever. All his work is just so clean and polished. And I feel like I have to have a whole other like Nick Fails Instagram page. Like I probably have more followers and engagement on that anyway. But just things like, and you learn over time, right? Like, oh, I printed these tote bags without getting a sample and they look like garbage and the Pantone colors are wrong. Like, oh, that's my fault. Like I should have requested a sample, right? So, okay, Nick, next time don't do that, right? Like, and those sort of things you just have to go through, and hopefully they're not all like huge financial failures, but some of them are, and you just have to keep going. Like there's just like a quote I heard that was like, just keep going at it long enough without making ruinous decisions. Like Because if you go long enough and you have some talent, you're going to find success. I think that was like in talking about like investing in the stock market. But yeah, like don't just like gamble the whole thing away in one thing, right? Like just make little deposits. You can apply that to your business too. Like make small deposits into what you're doing. I had another mentor that told me just make more smart decisions than dumb decisions. I was like, oh, that's actually like kind of empowering, because it's like, I'm going to make dumb decisions. It's okay. You just have to balance that with more smart ones. Don't make more dumb ones. So, yeah, I hope you guys got a little bit out of that, and happy to like do any Q&A. I mean, with our podcast, we're very back and forth with like just chatting about different concepts and ideas in the creative field. So up to you guys if you'd like that.
Oh, thanks, Nick. That was awesome. I was
Thank
curious about your artwork. When you lay these out, do you do it digitally or do you lay it out on paper first, like, for instance, these posters?
Yeah, most of it starts with a pencil sketch.
Uh-huh.
And then I use Adobe Illustrator and Photoshop, and then all the textures are either like vector bitmaps, or like bitmaps or vector graphics or acrylic washes. So I'll paint like an acrylic wash on a large sheet and scan it. And that kind of gives it, digital can look kind of clean and cartoony sometimes. So that's something that I've worked with over the years, and kind of just looking how other illustrators do digital work that looks more natural and kind of beat up, My canvas printer loves it because he's like, yeah, like all these other guys have these really clean images that we have to make sure there's nothing in the laminate when we're laminating the canvas. He's like, yours just has shit all over it. So it's like, it's so easy if we have like specks or anything in it. So, yeah, I like the idea. I mean, I'm very vintage inspired. I think you can tell. Like I love collecting old things, and I love patina on things. Like that's just something that I feel like works really well with this style. That answer your question a little bit? Yeah.
So you talked a little bit about, thanks again, Nick, great talk. I appreciate it. You talked a little bit about finding joy in your art and going back to like the sanctuary, the place where you found in 2010, like making this art for yourself, right? And for your family. Do you feel like the art that you make now for yourself do you have to change it because the art that you were doing for pleasure before is now your job, or does my question make sense?
It does, yeah.
Like how do you find that sanctuary again, I guess?
It's kind of two parts. One is illustrating locations that I'm passionate about and I have a lot of connection to. People will come out to events, and that's the thing now is like, hey, do you have this location? Do you have this location? And I mean, honestly, most of the times if it's on Oahu, we do. But then like you'll get some that are like, oh, like I don't really go there very often, or I want to steward that well, like I want to do that design justice. So if it's something that I'm maybe not passionate about at the time, then I'll pass on that for now, But maybe somebody will give a suggestion that I'm like, oh yeah, that would be amazing. Like I can already visualize in my head what that would be. You have those projects where you sketch for days and you just cannot figure out what you're doing. And then sometimes like people always ask, how long does it take to create a piece? And like there's just such a wide range, because sometimes I can sit down and draw or paint something in a day, but I also don't want to tell people, yeah, it just takes a day and we just crank it out and like sell it to the masses. Like that's not really what we do, And then on the other hand, that's a good question because it was something I didn't really touch on, was taking on projects that you're really passionate about, like commission work or collaborative work. Like doing the art for the Hurley Pro last year was like a total bucket list job for me. Like that was what I wanted. When I got into this in 2010, I was like, the pinnacle of what I'm doing will be to illustrate artwork for a surf contest. And like when Hurley came to me last year, they had just gotten the sponsorship. Like they've gotten back into sponsoring surf events, and this was at Sunset, and they brought it back as a WSL event. So it was really such an awesome opportunity, and that was something where it really reignited my fire for creating. Right, like that's something I would go there joyfully every day to the studio and be like, in my mind, I'm like, man, I love this. Like, I shouldn't be having this much fun right now. Like this weird thought in my head of like, no, this should be hard work. And I really, truly enjoyed it. And another thing I've done recently, I don't know if anybody's into NFTs, collecting or making or anything, but we have like a 6,000 character PFP project coming out February 7th. I'm working with some folks on that. And if you're not familiar, you might be familiar with like Bored Apes or things like that. Like they may be the most notable in the industry. But people will set these characters as their profile picture on Twitter. It's a digital collectible, so it's just like how we used to collect baseball cards as a kid or things like that. And this was a project for me that was like totally out of my comfort zone, totally out of my wheelhouse. But I have a friend who's a photographer, and he's like, yeah, we're doing this, it's travel themed PFP collection. And I was like, okay, this would be perfect. And so you create all these characters basically, and you layer them with different traits, and then you have this computer code that layers them in, if you're familiar with it at all. So you get to design all these fun different traits of hairstyles and faces and whatever. It's called Strangers, so you can find it on Twitter at StrangersHQ. But that was something that was really something that lit my fire again too for creating, because I basically spent like 3 or 4 months, almost that, entirely, like just working on like hundreds of different traits for these little cartoon characters. And Jasper Wong, if you're familiar with his work, he did the FOMO Mofos, and it's like 8,000 of them. So it's a similar thing. He sold those, minted them in like 2021. So it was like, that was an amazing time to be in NFT investing or collecting or whatever you call it. But yeah, that's another project that I guess has been something that made me realize like I should be having fun what I'm doing, right? If you're not, I guess you either need to be paying the bills or having fun or both. Otherwise, like we're just gonna go out and surf all day. Like why bother, right? So hope that answers it a little bit there.
Hi, Nick. Thank you for sharing the challenges you went through. I was just wondering if you could share more about the transition, like what went through your mind. Were you waiting to reach like a certain financial point or clients before you switched over to full-time?
Yeah, that's a great question. I overlapped maybe like a year and a half waiting tables and bartending. And I'm trying to think back of what like the moment was where I was like, okay, I can do this. I think it was, I had gotten to the point where I worked at the restaurant so long, I kind of pick and choose my schedule. So I think I started just like kind of tapering off, like I'm going to take one less day. I'm going to take one less day and kind of see how it goes, you know? And at some point I had maybe taken on a couple commission pieces, you know, maybe the sales of my prints and stuff weren't there, because it took a while to like grow my network of galleries and boutiques that carried work. So that was something that didn't happen overnight. But I took on, like, I think at the time I had like a tote bag design for Kahala Mall was one of them. And there were just a few things that I was like, wow, I'm kind of like busy right now and I don't have time to work at the restaurant today. And I started making that thought in my head of like, okay, well, what would it take to make that work full time? And my wife had just gotten a job at Hawaiian Airlines as a flight attendant, so she was able to kind of maybe in the interim gave us a little bit of a safety net maybe. But yeah, I'd never really recommend like dropping your other occupation cold turkey and just being like, I'm going for it full steam, you know? Like anytime I've ever done any entrepreneurial creative venture, I've always tried to do it with calculated risk, you know? There's always a risk there. Like the work could dry up, like people might not be interested, whatever, like, but I think you have to honor yourself with that. Like if you do find that you're busy enough and you're really enjoying what you're doing, it's worth taking that leap, you know? Or sometimes even if you have, like we've had guests on the podcast that had a great paying job, they just weren't fulfilled by it. And they're like, I'm going to give up this job that I worked so hard for like going out on my own and doing this. Like, and you have those doubts, I think, for sure. But again, like our life is short. Like we don't have a lot of time here. And if you're just going to be sitting in a cubicle or doing something you're not passionate about, like there's really no reason to do that, you know? So I'm not telling you to go quit your job right now. But this is not risk. This is not financial advice. But yeah, it's difficult, I think. But if you can calculate that and like figure out like, hey, am I going to be all right? Like, what do I need to just survive and live? And then after that, can I make a living out of this? And you can kind of get a feel like if people are complimenting of your work and you're starting to get more opportunities, you can sometimes like kind of extrapolate that out of like, okay, like we're growing, you know? Whereas sometimes like you can just hit a wall for a long time, and some artists do that, right? Like they'll have the greatest work, but maybe not know how to get themselves out there, or just not resonating with the right audience or something. And then something happens kind of overnight, and then they have that rocketing success. So it's just, I feel like I didn't answer your question at all, but those are my thoughts about it, at least.
Hey, Nick, thanks so much for this presentation. It's really inspiring.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Just curious, advice for creatives that want to get their artwork out to a wider audience, like you've done successfully with merchandising and producing your materials. Do you produce your work here in Hawaii? Like, does it get printed here too? Do you have like a business agent that helps to find these opportunities in galleries, or do you do all that yourself? How does someone kind of go from creating work for themselves to kind of getting it out there slowly to kind of like going as broadly as you seem to have? I see your work everywhere. It's beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, there were a few points in there that are really good to talk about. I do have a sales manager that helps just like keep up with any of our retailers and things. Like I got to a point where I just couldn't do it all, and I want to create. Like that's what's going to drive us forward. That's what I'm fulfilled by. So I need to put people in place that can do things either better than me or as good as me. But for a long time it was just me. And oh yeah, talking about getting your work out there, it's back to that safety. I think is like you have to just do it. Like it's at the beginning it's just freaking hard, but at some point it gets less hard. And I would go to galleries starting out. Green Room in Waikiki, they're Japanese owned, and they're just such a rad surf art gallery. Like I would go in there when I waited tables and be like, man, this work is so cool. Like it was like Andy Davis and Heather Brown and Kat Reeder, Christy Shin, like all of my friends, like some of my friends now, you know. But at the time, I was just like, gosh, these guys are so talented. This is so good. And my wife is the one who's just like, well, why don't you just bring your stuff in there and talk to the owner? And I was like, no, I can't do that. Like, there's no way. They're like, why? Just do it. So I set up, I found the guy's email, who's like a good friend now. And he was like, yeah, sure, come on in. Like, let's take a look. And I was so nervous. And I just had a few prints at the time. Looking back, like they weren't that good. And he's like, I gave him my nervous presentation of what I do. And he's like, yeah, cool. Let's put some stuff up in this corner over here and, you know, see how it goes. And now they're like one of our best retailers. And so the piece of advice there is like, why not go try it at least? At least put your pride aside, right? The other, just try it, because you don't have it now anyway. So if they say no, you just have to be okay with that, right? Like, oh, like maybe it's just not the right season or something. Like I definitely pour everything into my work. So if it does have a negative response, I'm like, I take that really personally, right? So constructive criticism are things you have to develop a thick skin for that. And that's only something you get by failing, by doing it, you know? If you don't ever do it, then you never develop that muscle, I think. But that has worked for us. Like a few of our best connections and network that we have over the years has been just because we went out there and tried it, you know? And we've gotten rejections. We've gotten a lot of no's. We've gotten just stuff that didn't work out. But that would be my encouragement, is like, just give it a go. Like if you feel like you have talent and you feel like people, your friends and people around you encourage you that way, like you have to honor them and do that, right? Like just because that's something that could bring you into some blessing that you never thought you'd have, you know? So hope that answers the bulk of that there.
Great presentation.
Thank you.
I was noticing earlier when you said you came here in 2005, which is relatively a short time ago, and I'm looking at a lot of your art, and I see extensive correct usage of macrons and okinas, and you've called Cocoa Head actually Cocoa Crater, which is actually its true name. And I really appreciate how much of a deep dive you've done into the Hawaiian language. It looks like you're representing the culture. And I was just wondering, when you decided to do this as a profession, did you take some course in Hawaiian languages or Hawaiian culture, or a self-study? Because it really seems like you've really explored it and understand it to a great deal.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question, because that is something that is really important to me. Yeah, somebody that is not originally from Hawaii, I really want, and I'm not perfect, obviously. Like, I have had people reach out to me over the years and be like, oh, hey, by the way, like, this is not the, back in the day, like, this is not the proper placement of this or something. And most of the time people are really kind, and like, if they know my heart behind it, I think that they're very receptive and are like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, that's cool. But I've taken occasional cultural seminars. I've worked with cultural advisors for several things. Online Hawaiian dictionary on the fly is really helpful. But yeah, I think like even more now, like I feel like I realize how important it is. When I first moved here, a lot of people don't, right? Like they're just like, just spell things like as you see them on Google or something, But I really try, and like I said, I'm probably 90% there. But if I can represent these places properly, that's like the utmost importance to me. And the fact that we have a mix of tourists and local customers is really important to me, and something I really value, that people that grew up at these locations can appreciate these, as opposed to just being your grass skirt cheesy hula doll that you buy on Google Shopping or something. So that was another thing. Mana Up, we had a cultural advisor in there that would kind of give you like, I feel like that opened my eyes to like things to be sensitive to and to steward. And just to sum it up, I do take it, I don't take it lightly, and I'm always learning for sure.
All right, you guys, looks like we're just about out of time, so let's hear it again for Nick.